thank you all for being here. I would like also to thank Ivan and Alex for organizing this workshop and for inviting me. Okay, this is the title of my talk, What Tarski said to the Dialetheists, and as we were commenting before, basically, as far as I know, he said nothing directly to them. So, however, there are some very, at least I think, there are some very nice considerations that he made regarding inconsistencies and contradictions that could be a kind of, well, that could be a kind of message for the Dialetheists, and they engender some interesting considerations on the relation of paraconsistency and contradictions and science. So that's the point. Apologies if the title was not meant to be taken literally. So I hope there is really an interesting message. So I'll go through the basics and give some of the definitions of the terms that I will need here. So basically, dialetheism, of course, as people define it, and the dialetheists themselves define it, is the claim that there are sentences of the form alpha and not alpha, which are both true. I take this to be a kind of syntactical definition. It says just that some sentences are true. And of course, if it were not for the fact that one sentence is the negation of the other, this would be not controversial or problematic. The interesting thing is that they are one the negation of the other. So dialetheism so far is a claim that one sentence and its negation, they are both true, and there are such sentences. Nothing more than that so far. But of course, as you all may already know, some of the motivations for being a dialetheist come from semantic paradoxes like the liar paradox, set theoretical paradoxes like Russell's paradox, which are claimed to engender contradictions and true contradictions, and of course also Gödel's incompleteness theorems. But other people also find a lot of different motivations in theory of change and motion that seem also to require dialetheism. So this is very well known on the literature on dialetheism and even general literature on paraconsistency. And then, as Michalis has already talked about this, the nice thing about being a dialethist today is that you have paraconsistent logic. So it was not so impressive some time ago when you had to deal with contradictions without an appropriate logic. And the claim is that, well, if you are accepting some contradictions, you can just avoid this problem of explosion by adopting a paraconsistent logic. And as Michalis presented, LP is one of the favorite systems. So yes, so now we have a logic that can handle the contradictions without explosion. So again, this is very well-known thing. And I have called this the received view on paraconsistency, right? Because that's what most of the papers on paraconsistent logic claim. So, well, we have inconsistent theories like naive set theory or this naive theory of truth. And then if you keep classical logic, you have an inconsistency, and inconsistencies lead directly to triviality. Everything follows from an inconsistent theory on a classical logical background, and then we lose this capacity to separate truth from falsity. So that's it. Well, now we have paraconsistent logic, and we can be happy. We can have our inconsistent theories and not have triviality. So this is basically what we find in most papers on paraconsistent logic, and yeah, that's also very well known. So I call it the received view, and there is nothing problematic on this term received view. This is what most people say. We have to avoid triviality. So yes, so paraconsistent logic allows us to control the damages of an inconsistency. We can keep the inconsistencies and avoid the problem which triviality would be. And of course, once you are saying that you're going to keep your contradictions, and this was the topic of Michalis' talk, right? If you are going to keep the contradiction, of course, you are very happy that you're not having triviality, but still you have a problem. How will you understand these inconsistent sentences that you are having? Are you going to be a dialethist and say that they are true, or are you going to suggest, as Michalis suggested, that well, we can have these contradictions without them being true in a sense that they reflect something about the world. This is the next problem, and I think that this points to a very important problem, that the received view on paraconsistency is not really paying so much attention, and that's where the message by Tarski gets in. Of course, then we have an extra ingredient. I said that dialectism is the thesis that a sentence and its negation may both be true. But then, when you add this usual definition of falsity, that a false sentence is the truth of the negation, so alpha is false if and only if its negation is true, then we really have something else, right? This is different from, well, standard semantics of this Brazilian school paraconsistent logics, where you have a sentence and its negation just both true. Now here we have what people call truth-value bloods. So true contradictions, if you have alpha and not alpha being true, then you can also say that alpha is true and false at the same time. So this is more than just saying that alpha and not alpha are true. You say that they are true and false at the same time. So that's why I call this as an extra ingredient. And then this is a new identity as, well, a different form of dialectism, because then you don't only say that some sentences are true and have a true negation, you say that they are true and false at the same time. I take this to be more than just saying that they are true with a true negation. They are true and false. So that goes a bit further than the previous definition. They are not equivalent, I would say. This is all preparatory definitions, okay? So this is the plan of the talk. After all this very well-known material, basically what I'm planning to do is to show you what I take to be these Tarkian messages, and then I will divide them in two groups. Some of these problems were anticipated by Michalis, and I will discuss them, and then I conclude, and then it's over. So, yeah, that's not very informative, but I hope that it is clear as I go. I should say that I am also a bit confused on some of these topics. Okay, so this is the first thing that I got when I read it. I said, I thought that this is something Tarski would say to a dialectist, right? He says, he writes, "We know, if only intuitively, that an inconsistent theory must contain false sentences, and we are not inclined to regard as acceptable any theory which has been shown to contain such sentences." This is on his paper on truth theory, the soft one. So basically, and I have made this emphasis on the important parts, at least for this talk, that inconsistent theories have some false sentences, and we know this, and then, well, why should we keep those theories or accept them? So this is the first message. The second message is a bit longer, and it says, "Personally, as a logician, I could not reconcile myself with antinomies as a permanent element of our system of knowledge." So the problem is to keep them and say that it is fine. So you can see it goes directly against this seeing antinomies as good things, as dialectists. So, however, I am not the least inclined to treat antinomies lightly. The appearance of an antinomy, for me, is a symptom of a disease. So, again, this is the important part. Starting with premises that seem intuitively obvious, using forms of reasoning that seem intuitively certain, an antinomy leads us to nonsense, a contradiction. Whenever this happens, we have to submit our ways of thinking to a thorough revision, to reject some premises in which we believed, or to improve some forms of argument which we used, period. We do this with the hope not only that old antinomy will be disposed of, but also that no new one will appear. So again, he's saying something I think that goes directly against his motivations for dialectism. Well, when a dialect sees an antinomy, he gets very happy with that and says, okay, now I have a confirmation of my theory. Tarski is saying exactly the opposite, right? He's saying, well, you should be really worried when you see something like that. So that's not something you would like to keep. And that's why I got this read passages, because basically these are some of the messages I take him to be telling to Dialetheists. Of course, Dialetheists came after that, and they do that on purpose, right? They reject what Tarski is saying. And their message to Tarski would be, well, you are wrong. So my point is that Tarski could have a point here against Dialetheists. And this will lead to some very worrying concerns, at least for me, when it comes to understanding Dialetheism. I take those messages to be, at least prima facie, very reasonable. So just let me go through very quickly the first message again. Basically, Tarski, just for us to remind what Tarski said, or at least what I think Tarski was saying. The first message deals with inconsistent theories. So basically, if you have an inconsistent theory, the theory is false. And then Tarski is saying something that I think most people would agree, that false theories, or falsity that you really know that this is false and it's plainly false, these are not acceptable. You should not be happy with this. But then the important thing, the important message for the paraconsistentists is that falsity is not triviality. Right? So I think that this is one of those, and I will come to this very soon, this is one of the points where the diagnosis that if you have a paraconsistent logic, you can just be happy, goes wrong. Because what Tarski is saying is not that you should stop our inconsistent theories from being trivial. You should stop them from being false. There's something more basic that people have not paid attention to. So this is one of the important messages that is directly not only to the Dialetheists, but to all of those who like paraconsistency. He's saying, he's not really worried to say, oh no, we have an inconsistency, now we have trivial theory. He just doesn't care about triviality. He's saying, we have an inconsistency, so we have a false theory. This is the problem. So this relates with the problem of interpreting what do you mean when you keep your contradictions. So you think, well, I can keep my contradictions, and provided that they do not explode, things will be fine. And Tarski is saying, no, you're having an inconsistent theory, why should we keep this theory? This is false. Why should we really want this as a good theory, right? So saying that it is not trivial is really no relief for Tarski. And the second message, of course, it is about this meaning of the contradiction in a very wide and broad sense. He said that the contradiction is a symptom of a sickness, that the theory has got something very wrong, and then it is time to stop and revise the theory, even if it takes very long to do that. Right? This should be a kind of a, and this, as I will claim later, will be a kind of a methodological rule for inconsistencies. They give us a warning. So, as Tarski said, as Tarski wrote, we should not want this to be a permanent component of our theories. And if we abandon this one message, this the second one, we lose an important resource or two to separate from good theories and bad theories. Right? We just don't have one of the best signs that something went wrong. We will be at a loss. If a contradiction appears, we don't know if that's a good sign or a bad one, because, well, this may be one of the true contradictions after all. So, if you take these messages seriously, then, of course, Dialetheists will be in a sort of trouble. And of course, I'm not saying that Dialetheists will not have a kind of answer to this, but I'm just saying that Tarski has a point. I argue for this. So this is acceptable falsities. So the problem, the first message was that if you have an inconsistency, the real trouble is not triviality, it's the falsity that comes with it. It comes with really some false sentences. And then the point is not that Tarski was that we never make mistakes. He knew very well that people make a lot of mistakes, and well, and Berkeley says this, well, a lot of people believe in inconsistencies, and whenever they find this out, they just try to change things and fix this. So this is not really a problem. That's not what Tarski was complaining about. He was complaining against this maintenance of falsities in our theories and being happy with that. So it's not against our being fallible and believing false and strange things. It's about keeping those as the nice parts of our theories. So this is not how to go against Tarski in this way. And part of the reason why I started making this weird title and putting Tarski and Dialetheism together is that before reading Tarski, I had found a reply by Arenhart to this kind of claim that inconsistent theories will have falsities. And now, of course, this depends on understanding inconsistency in terms of gluts, right? You have to accept that inconsistencies require truth and falsity, not only truth. Because basically, and this is very short and very quick reply by him in contradiction, and he says, well, yes, I have to consider that if you have an inconsistent theory, even if it's a true theory, then given the account of negation and truth and falsity that I am having, these theories will also be false. They have falsities there. But that's not a problem. So it seems that he was thinking of Tarski without mentioning Tarski. He says that's not a problem, because truth dominates falsity. That's the answer. They are false, yes, but they are also true, and truth dominates falsity. And you try to think, what does that really mean? And what is the role of this domination or falsity in this theory? And then I got worried, because falsity seems to play no important role here. We think falsity is basically as important as true, because if you got something false, then you are in trouble. If you got something true, then that's fine. So that prompted me to think about how to understand falsity in this dialetheist context. And it's very difficult to see how falsity can be important here if it is dominated by truth. And well, I'll try to spell this in more details. So that's basically the answer. He's saying that truth, they are false, yes, but they are also true, and this is what really matters. So yes, the question is, does that solve the problem? So then it seems that there is nothing bad about falsities, right? If it is dominated by truth, then, well, you can live with this. Just consider that they are also true. And I would like to say that there is something bad about falsities, just as Tarski was saying, that you cannot just be happy with false things, at least with known falsities, right? Of course, we have a lot of false beliefs, but those that you clearly know that are false, then that's a problem. So I think that this very claim seems to, that truth dominates falsity, seems to disappear when you consider what it takes to be a true contradiction. What does it require? If you are going to have a true contradiction, that requires something, right? That requires that something makes it true. And, well, I'm quoting here again, and his Arenhart is explaining what does it take to make a contradiction true. He says, now consider the situation in which both alpha and not alpha are true. Here the fact in virtue of which not alpha is true cannot be the mere negative one, that alpha is not true. So it's not just this. Typically it is, right? So if you have something false, then, well, that's simple. There must be a positive fact. What sort of thing this may be? We have already seen. I'm sorry, I'm reading from very far. That's just for my perspective here. Have already seen the existence of a priori and sound argument whose conclusion is not alpha, as with some of the logical paradoxes may be this fact. So if you are having a true contradiction, like alpha is true and not alpha is true, then you have a positive fact, whatever that really amounts to, right? You have to have something making alpha true and something making not alpha true. And then, then you have it, true contradictions. That's what you need. But then when you try to understand, and well, okay, but you were not only having true contradictions, you were having true and false sentences. That's what we needed to explain. Where does falsities get in this picture? Because it seems that if we have a positive fact for alpha and a positive fact for not alpha, then there's simply no place for falsity to enter in this place now. And then it seems we don't have gluts anymore. So I was trying to answer this, and I came with some possibilities. Well, let's see if we can make sense of this in the kind of scenario where truth is understood as correspondence, which should be compatible with dialecticism. So that's one possibility we could try to explore. We just need to accept some contradictory facts, and we can concede that. So a sentence is true if and only if it corresponds to the facts. And again, this is a very general recipe, and I don't think I need to set the details. But then, if we have facts for alpha and for not alpha, then it seems that we don't have gluts anymore. We just have alpha true and not alpha true. And then, where does the falsity go to? So, then we don't have gluts. It seems that something has to get out of this picture if we accept this account of true contradictions. And that's bad, because we wanted to discuss this very strong version of very more interesting version of dialectics. We just don't want two sentences of a weird form to be true. We want them to be true and false. But then when you explain to them what does it mean to have these sentences true, falsity just evaporates. Then falsity amounts to nothing. We don't have an explanation to falsity in this context. Of course, we could say, well, but that's what it means that to say that falsity is dominated by the truth. But then we didn't want it to evaporate and just get out. Furthermore, there is a big problem for people discussing negation in terms of the square of opposition, as Michalis is doing, because then if you have a sentence and its negation true, then negation is not switching from truth to falsity. It is now not a contradictory forming operator. That's what CFO means. So it seems that we cannot have everything we want together in the same picture. If you have true contradictions explained in these terms, then we don't have falsity, and negation does not change from true and false, and then we are in a bad situation, at least for people who want negation to act as a contradictory forming operator. Of course, there may be some ways out that I have not contemplated here, and you may be thinking of those now, but that's what I came with. Try a different theory of truth. Try truth and pragmatist theory of truth, right? Basically, because Grammaticus says that all of these classical theories of truth are compatible with dialecticism. So he says, well, we can hardly claim it in this context, the context where we have successful theories having inconsistencies, that the acceptance of inconsistent theory must be a temporary expedient. So how does it help us? It helps us in the following sense. Well, if you are a dialectist, you don't have to think that just because you had a contradiction now, this will disappear in the long run, and in the end, if there is some end, you will find a consistent theory. So, well, we may find some very nice contradictions that will remain forever now, and we carry them on until the end. So, if you are a pragmatist and say, well, we are heading, the truth is the end of inquiry, of the investigation, then inconsistency may remain. But then, if that is the story, I'm telling it very broad terms, we lose falsity again, because if you keep on running and in the long run these contradictions do not disappear, then that's because they are true and not really false. So we don't have again a story for what does falsity mean in this case. We lose these gluts all over again, and we lose this contradictory forming operator. I think this is a big bunch of problems and boring things to deal with. And of course, I did not enter into detail of why does it fail to be a contradictory forming operator. So then, in a sense, if we have some dialetia, we are in trouble to keep our whole set of things together, to make sense of a lot of important things. And basically, if we take this Tarski complaint seriously, then it seems that falsity should play an important role. We should find that false theories have something bad, and then the dialectist just cannot explain what falsity amounts to here. It is a kind of mystery. So that's what I find problematic. Right? So this is the first complaint. They want to say that we have some acceptable falsities, and then it turns out that we just don't know what to do with falsities. We cannot explain them. They just disappear from the picture. And then I had a second very long quotation that I read. I tried to read them and I got confused here. That was the second quote by Tarski, that very long one, when he said that, well, you cannot just have your contradictions and hope to maintain them as part of our definitive or best theories. So I think that there is another way to put the same problem, and I wanted to use this opportunity to make this quote because I like this very much, by Jesus Mosterin, and basically saying something that I take to be very similar to what Tarski said in that second quote. He says, well, the discovery of a contradiction in empirical science is experienced as a trauma. It produces uneasiness, discomfort, and anxiety across the community involved. So caught in this type of conundrum, it is not a way of living with contradictions that scientists are looking for. So paraconsistent logicians, they got the wrong kind of strategy. We are not just looking for, well, let's keep the contradiction and just live with this. No, that's not what we are looking for. But a way of jumping out of contradiction, that's what people are looking for. So you keep the problem, right? If you go paraconsistent, you just keep the inconsistency. And that's what people are not happy with. They just are not really worried about triviality in this moment. And for the few scientists that find a way of restoring consistency through strenuous effort and sheer creativity are justly hailed as intellectual heroes by the rest of the community. Of course, this may be too much, but I think in part it's correct. But then, of course, dialectists also have an answer to this, even before this objection was formulated. Because they say that we can, of course, choose as our best theory, as our true account of some part of reality, an inconsistent theory. Because basically you have to pay attention to how we choose theories, scientific theories, right? As a scientific theory of the atom or the motion of the planet or whatever. We choose them abductively. So we choose some of these epistemic or non-epistemic virtues like simplicity, accounting for the facts, economy, and fruitfulness, non-hardness, and we just check what the different theories available say about this. And Brice as well, it may happen that the best theory we have in this moment is inconsistent. So, like, we have consistent theories and inconsistent theories, but the inconsistent one accounts better for the facts, explain more, is more fruitful and more elegant. So if that happens, why would you just refuse this one just because it is inconsistent? So you can just choose the inconsistent one, and given that it scores better in this kind of calculus. So in this sense, we can keep with the inconsistency. There is a way to explain to people why they have chosen inconsistent theories. So it may score better than the other one says, as I was saying. And then there is nothing, at least in principle, forbidding an inconsistent theory from being the true theory. Inconsistency needs not to be taken as a transitory element. I have already quoted a claim for this fact before. And that's exactly what Tarski was saying, that was not very fine, right? He's saying, well, I don't think we can keep inconsistency as a permanent element of our theories. And then what's the problem with this claim by this dialectist? So now, if you're checking from these little balls, this is the second complaint by Tarski, and this is about the sickness, right? Its contradictions are a symptom that something is really wrong, and as Michaelis was saying, well, when you find a contradiction, you have some information, and what Tarski is saying, yes, you have information that you got things wrong, so you have to change your theories. And that's what also Mosterin was saying. So I'm quoting everybody. And I have this very nice quote that I like very much, and basically because if you do follow the dialectists, you lose this kind of machine to move science, this engine, right, for the development of science. and this is very funny. Some people think it's offensive, but it's a quote by Musgrave. He says, Aristotle's theory of terrestrial motion is easier to learn and more intuitive than modern physics. He says, I am not making this up. Educational psychologists have produced ample evidence that it is true. Trouble is Aristotelian physics contradicts observable facts. No problem. Let's just become paraconsistencies in physics as well and go back to the Dark Ages. So basically what he's trying to do now, I think it's a funny way, is saying that if you go paraconsistent really, you will basically be blind to the kind of problem that your theories have and just stop scientific change. So inconsistencies, as Tarski said, and that's the message, they are good because they somehow move our theories forward, but they cannot be kept there, right? Otherwise we would stop with Aristotle and say, okay, no, that's a true contradiction, let's keep it. So when you try to be a kind of naturalist in methodology, you say, well, let's check science and see what they are doing. They, as Mostari was saying, they just don't keep contradiction. They are just not happy with keeping those things. So, in a sense, and Tarski is joining in this one, accept contradictions is a kind of recommendation for the scientific practice instead of learning with scientific practice. So, and I find this very illustrative because it is very confusing. Sometimes you find examples of inconsistency in science and dialectics and paraconsistent logic. You see, scientists reason with paraconsistent logic. But then, Arenhart says, well, I am recommending you to use paraconsistent logic, but paraconsistent logic is revisionary and revolutionary. So it's not a description of what people do. It is a recommendation of what they should do, right? So we have an option, either to really go paraconsistent and then see some contradictions as true ones. And this is not just Arenhart, but also Newton da Costa does a similar advice in his essays book. He said, well, okay, I agree, there are no contradictions in science so far that you can take as true, but now we have paraconsistent logic. Now scientists can consider this option. And then what Tarski is saying and most of them are saying, well, that's a bad advice, right? You're going to ruin things. And of course, I will skip this very, very quickly. There are some other parallel problems that I will not discuss here that are related, for instance, with the very formulation of realism, for instance, and theory change. Let's say, well, okay, we have a theory that has a true contradiction, it is true and false, and we have some new theories that have to retain what's successful in the old ones, and in particular they will retain some falsities. Well, that's not how realism would frame things. So it's very difficult to understand scientific realism in this context. But this is a minor point. I know that I am almost out of time. So I'll go for the conclusion now. So yeah, according to Arenhart, the argument for dialectism is very global. It succeeds in treating a lot of problems, logical problems, that classical logic or intuitionistic logic just fail to treat. But then, of course, as I was trying to convince you, I think, maybe not successful, this solution has a price, right? Falsity becomes very mysterious, it collapses on truth. We lose important features of negation that people would like to have. We lose this idea that the scientific methodology is getting things right and that we should let these folks work and not recommend things for them from just because our logic allows some things. And then, yes, there is a kind of problem with the progress of science if dialectics is going to be wrong or right. So these are the messages that Tarski would have, and of course, if he didn't, then these are the messages that I would like to see in Tarski. So it's my responsibility. These are the references. Thank you.